All right, welcome to episode 221 of the Comic Watchers. My name is Chad. My co-host Matt has the night off, but that's all right. We have a full house here, and we're going to be talking about Darkwing Duck and the Kickstarter that is currently being run by Dynamite. And so I'll just let you guys go around the room, introduce yourself, and kind of how you are involved in the project.
All right, point to who you want. I'll start.
Why don't you go first, Ted? Since
Sure. I'm Tad Stones. I'm retired now, but way back in the day at the Disney Afternoon, I created Darkwing Duck along with my incredible team, of course. Does take a village. We're a small city.
Okay, we'll go with Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda Deibert, and I was lucky enough to get to write a recent run of the Darkwing Duck comics.
Okay.
And I'm Jeff Parker, and I'm currently working on Negaduck, the evil opposite of Darkwing Duck.
Nice. Now,
Writing.
I'm, I'm a, I think now Darkwing Duck first came out or appeared in 91, 92. Is that correct?
Yeah, I always think of it in 91. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So, I mean, and for me, I was like high school, getting ready to go into junior high, getting ready to go into high school. But I do remember the show because I did have a younger brother who was 3 years old, so he was a fan of the cartoon, and so that's kind of my history with the character. Tad? Why don't you kind of talk about developing him and what inspired him, and how
Well,
how Darkwing Duck came to be.
yeah, I'll do the short version so we have time left over. I was actually ordered to develop a show called Double O Duck by Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was then head of Disney Motion Pictures, Television, and overseeing animation. Jeffrey and Michael Eisner were of the same mind that if you had a show with what they considered anyway, a clever, intriguing name, you'd get more people to try it out, and then it was up to you to do a great show that kept them. And he thought Double O Duck was a great show. There had been an episode of DuckTales with Launchpad and a Quack, but he specifically said, no, it can't be Launchpad. The whole point is to develop a new line of characters and, a new lead character. So I did that. I did the first shot. I was not excited about it. I said, well, it's just going to be a James Bond parody. And that's what I pitched. And he basically said, this is just James Bond parody. And said it lacked Disney heart, which I agreed with. And he told me to redo it, which these days I realized was lucky because normally it's like, I'll get somebody who's talented to do it. Anyway, so I went back into it. We finally made a breakthrough when we added the character Goslin, who was just the idea. I love Calvin of Calvin and Hobbes. And I said, what if that was the personality of a little girl who just refused to stay at home as he went out on all these exploits? The initial artwork for Darkwing was a basic generic Disney duck, except with a mask in a white tuxedo with a purple mask, hat, and cape. And when we were brainstorming with some of the writers and story editors, one of them, Dwayne Capizzi, said, you know what, that tuxedo and cape thing looks more like a pulp hero, like Green Hornet or The Shadow. And that was enough it just clicked something in my head. I said, that's a new template. We don't have to parody Moneypenny and Q and all of the Bond things. I thought of Doc Savage. You had a team of eccentrics who each had a specialty. So we dove into that, had this big team, and quickly realized that there's too many bodies, especially since most of this team would be at the headquarters. And, you use up half the show before you go on a mission. So we kept hacking away. Launchpad was actually part of the show because he was a pilot for transportation. And then we settled on basically the trio of Goslin, who is the reason we got to do the show, Double O Duck, and Launchpad McQuack. Disney took out big ads for it, and the people who owned the James Bond rights said, excuse us, we own Double O, you can't use that name. We had a contest. Alan Burnett, who later on left us and went to Warner Brothers to do the New Adventures of Batman. He came up with the name Darkwing when we had a contest, and all the other names sucked. Basically, that was the only choice. And I said, that's what he thinks he is. I added on Duck because that made it sillier, which is closer to his reality. That loss of the name allowed me, just my way my brain worked, to pivot way away from the spy stuff. It was still part of it because they funded him, and that would give us international missions if we wanted them. But it really took me back to the Silver Age of comics, which was, especially the age before Marvel, when I was a really little kid. And the covers of the comics were things like Jimmy Olsen being a giant turtle boy, the Flash with a giant light bulb head, and which they redid with Superman and Lois Lane, and everybody got a light bulb head at one point or another. It was just bigger ideas, very light continuity. And that stuff I started feeding into Darkwing Duck. And so that's what he is, kind of a fun, parody, not even parody, just a embracing of the Silver Age of comics.
Now, he's not in the same universe as the DuckTales, because wasn't Launchpad McQuack part of DuckTales before he went over to
I forgot when, but the Hollywood Reporter interviewed me once. This is, not that long ago, it probably is now, but let's say within the last 6 years. Anyway, somewhere in there, they interviewed me, and I said it's a different universe, which set fans crazy. And I always said, like, wait, don't you understand how alternate universes work? You go into the evil one, everybody has a goatee, but there's, an evil Spock, an evil Kirk, and evil Dr. McCoy, whatever. Because fans would point to Launchpad and say, he proves that they're in the same universe. I said, no, he proves that they're not. My Launchpad is stupider. He's a good pilot, not a bad pilot. And yes, of course, he once worked for Scrooge McDuck, the version in that universe, So there is a same counterpart. And somehow fans went in a tizzy, which I enjoyed immensely. So he was basically, what it meant is, it's not like I said that officially when we were doing the show. It's just that I was always, basically, this is its own show. It's got bigger cartoon physics than DuckTales has by far. And if we wanted to use a character from DuckTales, we would, like Gizmo Duck. We just wouldn't worry about whatever stories had been told in DuckTales. So it was a way of getting out of doing any sort of research, and that's how we did it.
And that kind of confused me when I was reading Justice Ducks, and to kind of get ready for my interview with with Richard, who is also Richard, who's also part of the project. And I was like, I thought Gizmo Duck was part of DuckTales, and then or Darkwing Duck isn't. It's like confused. Even my comic book trained mind couldn't wrap around it.
Yeah, it's just like with Launchpad, who we redesigned. We redesigned Gizmo Duck 2 slightly. It was just, fun. It was basically my character designer just had a great sense of design and just, said, oh, let's make this broader shoulder, more streamlined and whatnot. So we didn't pay attention to rules a lot in the show.
All right, so let's talk to Amanda. Kind of give us your history as a comic book reader and writer, and how you kind of got involved with Darkwing Duck.
Sure. Well, I'll say I was a kid at the perfect age for Darkwing when the cartoon came out. I was about 8, 9 when in 91, 92. And the cool thing is my daughter is 9 now, so it was fun to kind of introduce her to something that I grew up with, because I was rewatching all of the cartoons before I started writing. And so she got to, do hard work with mommy, where we watched all the cartoons together, and that was really fun. She has such a skewed concept of what a job is. And as far as my writing background, in comics, I I also write for animation and for television. I did that first, and then I started. But I grew up reading comics, and I go to the grocery store, and my mom would get me a new Archie every time if I behave myself well in the grocery store. And then my best friend's stepfather ran our local comic book store, so I'd get to go in after hours and like read whatever I wanted to without paying for it.
Awesome, boy.
Sweet gig. But then when I was just getting started in TV writing, I also started dating this comic book illustrator who's now my wife, Kat Staggs. And we started doing web comics. It was like I would tell funny stories about my life that were embarrassing, and she would illustrate them. We had those online for a while. And then I was also doing some comedy videos for a website. And there was a Father's Day. I was orphaned when I was young, and there was a Father's Day that I made a hilarious video about dealing with Father's Day when you've been orphaned young. And throughout the course of the video, I slowly was morphing into Batman, but without ever saying that. And that was kind of the punchline of the video. And apparently it went around the DC offices. And then an editor reached out to me, and she had seen some work that I had done in some anthologies and the web comic I'd done. And she was like, do you want to try to write a Wonder Woman comic? And I was like, oh, sure. I'll cut my teeth on the most iconic female superhero of all time. What could go wrong? And so I did, and it worked out. They kept hiring me, and that's how I got where I am today.
Okay. And Jeff, how about what's your comic book story as a reader and a creator?
I started as an artist, and right around the time I started getting work, right around the time Darkwing was airing, and I was working originally for Malibu Comics, which Marvel bought out of existence. And then later in the 90s, comics shrunk down and imploded because there was a collector's speculation bubble. Some of your viewers probably know about it. And I moved out to California and briefly worked in animation too. But I was at Sony Animation working on the Big Guy and Rusty, the Boy Robot cartoon, which you mentioned Dwayne Capizzi.
Yeah, Dwayne Capizzi was a writer and producer, and I wondered if
he was working there when I showed up, and so I always enjoyed him. And then after that, I did storyboards for a bit, and I had been working on a graphic novel of my own, and I came out with that. That was called The Interman. And after that, people started hiring me to write, and within a few years, no one remembered I drew. It was just like I just made a successful career jump, and like even when I tried to convince people, they this very funny writer. But I still draw some. And then I ended up working for the next decade or so for Marvel, and ever since then I've worked a lot for Dynamite and DC Comics, and I occasionally put out my own original thing, hoping someone will read it, and then they wait until I'm doing something with Batman again. So but yeah, he's got a copy of Blighter. That was I Kickstartered that, and
this is your art, right? This
that's the epilogue that I drew because I had to have something where I was like Drew Moss, who's working on Dynamite's Thundercats right now, did the rest of the art. It's beautiful, and but I carved out a little epilogue for myself so that I could you got to know what you're doing. Every now and then you've got to do it again, or like I might drift too far away and start giving artists something undrawable, and I don't ever want to do that. I tend to lay out stuff, even whether I show them the layout or not, just to make sure everything works and the dialogue exchanges work and things like that.
And do you remember? Can you tell us about how you got into comics as a reader?
Oh, my dad owned a grocery store when I was a kid. It was a little curb market. Like now, everybody calls them bodegas, but in the South, I'm actually from where Amanda's from, North Carolina. So these
I
little
could hear
hillbilly.
I was like, you sound like home.
Yeah, and When you told that
That's so
story
sweet.
about picking
You
up
sound like
somebody's
home.
spit cup and drinking it, it just like made me have such awful flashbacks to almost doing that. Sorry, that's completely unrelated, but I'm a big fan of Amanda and her wife Kat. They're top talent. And anyway, so we had a spinner rack in the store. So I would generally, after doing whatever little chores I was trusted to do, go sit on the Coke machine and just read every comic on the spinner rack. And it was mostly because it was determined by whoever the distributor in the area was. So I think I mostly had DC Comics, Harvey Comics, and Archie. And I would just read all of them. And then sometimes I would like go over to the magazine section and read the Warren mags like Vampirella. And I'd look around because I wasn't sure I was supposed to be reading that.
Especially Vampirella, yeah.
No one would make me put it down. So I'd I'd read that too. That's why I like working with all ages stuff. I feel like something should be entertaining to a kid all the way to for the next 60 years. There's no reason you can't like, and Darkwing Duck was like that. Like, there was stuff in there kids wouldn't have gotten the nuance of the joke quite a bit, and it's kind of there for their parents who are watching to like, oh, they're making a reference to this thing I used to enjoy. And I like that. Just like there's no reason you can't do that.
Yeah, I started with Spooky Casper, the Disney comics, and Wendy, and all of that. And I didn't know there were comic book stores until I went to TV Animation, and the guy said, "Hey, every once a week we go to the comic book store." And I was like, "Comic book store?" Because in my day, there were comics everywhere. It was in the supermarket, the drugstore, the spinner racks. It was just comics were like the air. It was just, you could find them all over. Trying to get a complete set of something is, well, you may have to go to a couple supermarkets and all that, depending on it.
Oh, that was impossible. Do you remember what the comic shop was?
The first comic we went to was, it was on Ventura Boulevard.
Meltdown?
I think it's there anywhere.
Oh, no. Golden Apple.
No. Golden Apple would have been in Hollywood. This was like, I want to say it was American Comics or ABC Comics, or that doesn't sound right. I'm sure they're not there now. And then it turned out, there are comics bookstores in Burbank, because later on I went to House of Secrets. You could walk to it from the studios. And that's where you saw all the other guys in animation would be there. And I'm not necessarily the best even back then with faces and memories and names and all that. And I'd worked with a lot of guys since starting in animation. And I remember seeing a guy at the House of Secrets as you're walking around the center comic rack, the shelves as everybody's picking out as they're walking through. And there's some familiar guy, and I said, "Oh yeah, hi." It's like, I know him from, he must have been on one of my shows. Well, it's Patton Oswalt. It's like, oh, okay, he was familiar for a whole different reason, But no, anyway, that was, the comic shop was a revelation for me. And by the way, when I started with that, it started with like Camelot 3000, and then The Dark Knight came out, and Watchmen came out, and we would buy that stuff and race back, have lunch, race back to the studio, and no work was done as we read the new issue of Watchmen and then talked about it for a bunch more. So, but it was worth it. It was all feeding the brain.
So Ted, when they were when they came up to bring Darkwing Duck to the comic page, did they approach you to help, or?
Short answer, no, because I worked for Disney, and Disney has owned everything you did. So which Dynamite is collecting those first issues of Darkwing Duck. They just saw the show, and we thought, cool, one, because it had such comic book sensibilities. There was also a small size, the Disney Adventures, or maybe it was even called Disney Afternoon back then. And some of my storyboard artists did, I don't think it's part of this collection, but my storyboard artists did some of the art in those early stories, which they loved. So anyway, then, but to show you how disconnected it was, I moved on to a new show. So I didn't even know that there was a Marvel run of Darkwing Duck, like 10 issues, which again, Dynamite is collecting in the Kickstarter. I didn't know it existed. I was in Agrabah. I mean, I was on flying carpets and, talking irascible parrots and monkeys. And since then, I've learned that 3 of the issues have Darkwing living in a human world, not even dog noses. So it's like, okay, definitely got to get that collection and find out what's going on.
Huh.
I mean, the show was available to watch. It could have made the effort, but whatever.
So, Jeff, I know you've worked, I think it was Booster Gold and another cartoon. It was one of the Hanna-Barbera properties with Booster Gold that you did. Is that correct?
Are you thinking of Future Quest with Space Ghost and all that
stuff? Yes.
How did
I think
Booster
so.
Gold get in there? I
thought there was. I thought there was a Booster Gold crossover. I don't know.
Oh, you know
Sorry.
what? It probably was because yeah, but I didn't work on that one. Yeah, I did me and Doc Shaner and Ron Randall and some others did the big maxi series for the Future Quest thing where Space Ghost and Johnny and the Herculoids and everybody Alex Toth or Doug Wildey worked on all teamed up to fight this big thing. And it was originally Darwin Cook helped me with the whole pitch. He was originally involved at the beginning of the project, and then he had to bow out for what later we understood were the health reasons that took him. And but anyway, I did that, and for this brief period that DC got to do all their cartoon material, and now they've kind of snatched it all back, and the divisions seem very separate again. It's kind of strange.
Yeah, I remembered it was something like that, but did you learn anything then? Writing the cartoon characters in comic book forms that you've used in your run on Darkwing Duck? Maybe.
Well, I've adapted other things. None are coming to mind now. From cartoons to comics. It's interesting. Like you got like when I did Batman 66. You don't have the real time on your side to do the kind of dialogue that would really get the voice across. You have to, comics are frozen moments, and you've got to really pick, like, how can I, with the room I have for a balloon with 15 words in it or whatever, how can I make this sound like the character so that people buy this as the character? With Adam West, I would just sit there and walk around reciting his soliloquies, and then I'd kind of whittle them down until I got that. And then what really sold it, of course, was if the artist got the whole gestures and mannerisms. Like Jonathan Case was drawing the first one we did, and he just nailed it so much. You could hear Adam West's voice coming through it. You could hear Julie Newmar in your head. It was, that's the fun thing to do. But now I wish when I started the Negaduck thing, I could have just called Tad, because I wanted to ask him, does Negaduck have a saying like "terror that flaps in the night"? Because I can't find it, or something like that.
Okay.
But, that'd be kind of.
This drives me crazy. It's just like that never occurred to us, and it's like, well, I've been so natural, Oh, geez,
I'm so grateful that you guys did not care about continuity, because
much to fans'
it's like that's what made it fun. You change the origin of something and then just completely reverse it later, and
well, Negaduck was an example of that, because he was only in one show where Darkwing was split into a good and evil side. And my famous story is that at the end of that, because Jim Cummings did both voices. Plus, on the storyboards, we worried about getting it screwed up overseas since you have characters look exactly the same.
Oh yeah.
And I think a few scenes slipped in wrong, and I forget whether we got them in retakes or not. But Jim did a great job on the voice, and I said, I love this character. Let's bring him back. And the story editor said, how do we do that? Then we have basically the same story every time with Posiduck and Negaduck. I said, oh no, nobody likes Posiduck. He's boring. No, just bring back Negaduck. And they asked me, well, how do we explain that? And I said, you don't. It's like nobody told me how the Joker was constantly evidently breaking out of prison and the Riddler and all that. And you know, it was just, if you just paused, maybe, but you were there for the story. You just jumped in. You don't say like, hey, how did the Joker get out? It's like, oh my God, look what the Joker's doing to Batman. So, you know, that's how I was with the show. And it's kind of what helps me when Darkwing has reappeared in comics, or somebody's trying to reboot him or something. I tend to be, I love, you know, giving my opinion on stuff, but I always try to understand what they're doing. Like when Boom did their run, they were heavy continuity. Those guys decided, like, you know, and it made it more like a modern comic, and it was like Gargoyles level continuity. And then when Dynamite took it over, I don't know if, like, you know, Nate did this as a group or each of you took certain liberties, but the changes made sense. Specifically with Negaduck, what Jeff did is he put more Darkwing in Negaduck. We played him really one note. I mean that was part of the fun, but I always say, given the choice, he always chooses Chainsaw. So it was one note. It was fun. You know, he treated everybody equally bad, even his teammates or whatever. You know, but Jeff has given him more of Darkwing's ego and just, it's, you know, it's not like trying to be religious about, oh no, he would be the opposite of that. No, it's just he's an evil version of Darkwing, but there's more Darkwing essence, which makes it much better for the comic run that way. Same thing.
Thanks,
Roger in Justice Ducks just naturally made the aquatic character Neptunia, who is always a, you know, big mouth and opinionated. She just naturally becomes the leader, and that solves the Aquaman, how do we use this guy if there's no water around problem. And so all of that, you know, is just a little, in fact, Darkwing's ego in all the comics has come down a little bit, which was the essence of our show, but it's like, it can be repetitious. You know, you don't, when you're looking for character arcs, that was almost always at the heart of ours. But, you know, in a comic, you want to have more, especially with the Justice Ducks. When he works with them, you don't want to constantly have him trying to fight for leadership or whatever. So, you know, I try to see what they're doing and then, you know, support it.
Roger is one of the, I can say this because he's not on the show right now because he's 8 hours away. He's one of the greatest living cartoonists working in my book. That guy has just never turned in a dud. He's as good a writer as an artist, and everything. His instincts are fantastic.
I think his run on Justice Ducks, and I haven't finished it because, you know, it was generally I don't buy material that that's based on characters that I created. Like, no, you want to give me it, fine. Yeah, exactly. Except I did subscribe to Negaduck, you know, digitally to get all those, although somehow I missed issue 4. But I held off on Justice Ducks for whatever reason. And then in prep for the Kickstarter, I said it would help if I had a few of these to read. And they basically sent me the package they would give to reviewers. So it was like the first 4 issues. And it's like, it's delightful. That's the closest to doing to me, classic Donald Duck, Uncle Scrooge comic. I mean, he has the way of getting into an adventure at lightning speed, and most of them are standalone issues. And the artist changed his style a bit working with Roger, and that worked out great too. And, you know, it's just been fantastic. So I want I want the rest of the run, dudes. It's like, someone tell Nick. And
Unfortunately,
we lost
you
Amanda.
guys.
Yeah, where's
Yeah,
Amanda?
she said in the chat that she double booked accidentally due to time zones. So,
Ah,
but she's really going to miss hearing the two of you guys, you know, converse about Darkwing.
okay. Well,
But
she'll have to watch the
you have to
rerun.
watch the show. Yeah.
I haven't given her my compliments yet, which
Yeah,
I've
and
said in almost
Well,
everything.
she
One
had the
of
so
pink
things
pool in the background too. That was really adding a.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the
it
things
was
Amanda
looking
did.
it was looking refreshing sitting here in this hot room.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. One of the things Amanda did in her run was she really got the character Morgana Macabre.
Yeah,
And that
she did.
is, fans point to a two-parter that introduced the Justice Ducks as being two of the best episodes. But the part it always bothered me is that Morgana in that is weaker, just not as a personality. Whereas you look at her single episodes, and she's a stronger person, more of a Catwoman. She could be pulling off a crime or whatever. And Amanda really got that, and that's my feeling. Is I want to see everybody do like a 6-issue run of each of the Justice Ducks, skipping Darkwing, but everybody else. And I just bought the complete Sandman set because I realized just back when I was buying them by the issues, they just lost track and I never finished them. And I had a cool gift card for my birthday plus Father's Day. I said, I'm going to get this. This is the one that Neil Gaiman recommends, this set. And I said, that's the one I'll get. But my feeling is you do a Morgana 6-issue, run. We played with like Universal Monsters and a little bit in Lovecraft, but it's like, no, have all these comics, do Doctor Strange, the Steve Ditko weird visuals. And I want to see a Duck version of the Endless, maybe not all of them, but just like, why not just have fun with all the comics tropes that have come up since then. And hers could be a whole supernatural story. And Neptunia could be a whole undersea adventure. And I love seeing new villains created and all of that, which Jeff did. I mean, he did, he introduced all these new wacky villains. And that's part of the fun. You get tired seeing the same 5 guys over and over.
One thing I liked about Richard's Justice Ducks was I think it was the first issue. You got the space aliens. I got a fourth world vibe from them. He was kind of confused about that, but maybe I'm just weird. But and then in the second issue, he had the Doctor Who and companion type character that show up, and he's done a lot of Doctor Who work too.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool to see him work that into his story.
Yeah, that's all the stuff we'd be doing now if we were doing the show now. It's just like having fun with the more modern conceits, but still, have fun with the parody element. One of my favorite episodes is Twin Peaks, which was based on Twin Peaks, obviously. And I remember it was originally proposed by Jan Stronad. And I said, okay, Jan, it just has to work for somebody who's never seen the show, which should have been the bulk of our audience. And he took a shot of it, an outline. I said, he just threw in references to the Log Lady and Cherry Pie and whatever, which means nothing to anybody watching who hasn't seen Twin Peaks. But I said, this doesn't work. And I realized at that point that this isn't going to work if I keep Jan on it, because it's ultimately my taste and I'd be the arbiter of this is too random, and what's Darkwing, what's Twin Peaks and all that. So I took it over and had a lot of fun with it. And I know it worked because one of the other story editors had never seen Twin Peaks. He just never watched the show, and he loved the script of that episode. He says, "This feels so weird, it's so odd." And so that's the type of stuff. At the time, we said we should do more of this. We should find shows that we could give a Darkwing twist to. The problem is we had a much tighter schedule than modern shows have. And so I had to basically, I worked with 4 or 5 story editors. So they're constantly pitching to me and stories are coming through. And I basically had to work with whatever story they gave me. The ones I thought were, I mean, we go back and forth on it. But, you know, I couldn't wait for, well, wait, we're holding out for these. No, it had to go through. Somebody told me once that at Warner Brothers, like on Tiny Toons or Animaniacs, they were allowed to throw out like 3 scripts a season, and my jaw dropped. It was, you're allowed to throw out a script? You know, it's like, we just tried to say, okay, this is as good as we can make it. I got to hand it to the artist and give a lot of notes to the artist and all that, and then literally packed it up in a box and sent it overseas and crossed your fingers. The idea that you'd have that luxury of time to plan out stuff is, you know, amazing to me. So anyway, that, you know, I would love to see Amanda do, like I say, the Endless, some Doctor Strange thrown in, Brother Voodoo. I don't know, who knows, but you know, just having fun with all that stuff. Even if people don't recognize what's being done, it should still work. You know, I've told this on other podcasts recently. My last big convention I went to before the pandemic was in Russia, and they surprisingly pointed out to me, Tad, we didn't know Darkwing Duck was a parody. And I realized, oh, they didn't, back then they didn't have superhero comics. They didn't have the superhero movies or TV shows. They didn't have the Twilight Zone. So I was getting credit for all of that. Like, oh, Tad's this genius, you know, he has this humorous thing. And it turns out that, no, this pretty girl is the ugly one and everyone else is pretty, you know. It's just that kind of craziness. So I would love to see people playing around with that.
Now, Jeff, I know you've talked about, excuse me, your run with Negaduck. Can you kind of, I'm interested to hear about some of these villains that you created as part of that. What is the kind of the basis or the, you know, the driving plot line for the story?
Well, you know, I was thinking about one. I did it so that like I wouldn't have to keep asking everybody, can I borrow, you know, a cup of bush root or whatever, because he's already being used at the moment, which it's always a silly thing, but I would get that, especially at Marvel all the time. Like, no, sorry, Luke Cage is busy. Like, it's like, I'm pretty sure he can make the time for this other book because he's not real. And so,
and that was the glory of the Silver Age. It didn't matter, you know, who's on another planet currently. It was like, no, it's a separate comic. He's, you know, there is no worry about crossover.
Yeah. And who knows when you're going to read the comic. And another thing I was thinking about, I worked for a while writing Thunderbolts for Marvel, and that's all villains. And you realize really quickly, like, the way to make your villains seem more heroic is just put worse villains all around him, so that, you know, it's like, are they just annoying? Like, they, you know, they're not necessarily meaner than Negaduck, who could be, but you know, just like, I don't know, they can be a little more one note, and you can let Negaduck, like, I'm glad Tad picked up on the fact that I was essentially just making him Darkwing, but a little less moral, you know, because it's like Darkwing's ego is the fun part, you know. That's what I was enjoying. It's like, no, he's like him, but with no scruples, you know. It's like, he's not bizarre.
I mean, I love the part where in the story where basically these villains have come from different dimensions and all that and are hanging out here because it's relatively safe. And they're playing cards and having margaritas or whatever.
They've just got a cool hangout. It's
like, and Negaduck says, evil isn't a hobby. You know, it's like,
he's just insulted by the whole.
And
they keep taking him around, showing off their sweet lair. You know, like, look at this. We've got a soda stream. We've got a pinball machine over here, and everything. So. Yeah,
that's where I'm left off, waiting for the next issue. Is Negaduck is taking control and all that stuff.
Yeah, so it's and it's fun. It's funny how fast, like, you were just making me think of how spoiled viewers were back then. They got so many episodes as opposed to now, where it seems like we're moving to a BBC type production schedule on things, where here's your 10 episodes. And like you guys are shooting way past that at the time, and
well, when we started Darkwing, the business model is just 65 episodes. That gave you 13 weeks of Monday through Friday shows, and then the conceit or the thought was very jaded, but that's enough to mix them up in order, and kids will be watching them forever. That there was no plans to do any more. ABC decided they wanted the show. They asked for 13 episodes, and since this is the first time that had happened in any of the properties, we got to make 13 additional episodes. And then ABC wanted a second season, where normally they'd say, no, we'll just take 13 out of here and show them in both places. But then a few years after that 65 order went down to like 44, I think. And then syndication kind of petered out. But the idea of something like SpongeBob, where hey, he's really successful, well, let's do more, and we're going to keep doing them as long as he's super successful. That was, they never thought in those terms. So people said, why was Darkwing canceled? And it was like, he wasn't canceled, he actually got 2 extra seasons. That actually, Gargoyles, Greg Wiseman, the syndication people were not fans of that show, because exactly what I said, they wanted to be able to just mix up the episode order and put them in any order they wanted. And Gargoyles is like the most continuity in a show, and that you have to follow through in order basically to catch everything. And even then, I remember a station just had a thing where they show Monday through Friday, and then on Saturdays they would show Monday's episode because they had another slot. And it was like, however it was something like that. And it was like, well, that's totally out of order. That doesn't make any sense for somebody who's just watching the weekend. They're going to be lost. So it's a whole different business model. And now it's random on each, depending on which channel you're working for, I guess.
Now, other than Darkwing Duck, do you guys have another cast member that you are particularly fond of that you'd like to see more done with? I know you've talked about Morgana and stuff like that. Is there any other characters that you would like to see from this universe kind of get some of the spotlight?
My favorite character while we were doing the show is actually Goslin, again for that Calvin Hobbes personality. And that, I mean, feasibly, I suppose you could do a comic based on her exploits. But I mean, as far as other spin-off characters, to me, the Justice Ducks are what I would like to see is some of the other villains getting repeated. I mean, one of my favorite Alien shows is the Brain Teasers, which were basically when Michael Eisner first came to Disney, we had a meeting at his house on his first Sunday there to talk about TV animation, which didn't exist for Disney at the time. So that's how important he considered it. And I had an old project that I had pitched of Mickey and I think it was Mickey and the Brain Teasers. And the Brain Teasers were these like starfish characters that would sit on your head. And I realized later that, of course, I'm having half memories of Starro and all of that famous, so I'm sure that would have been a lawsuit. But when we did in Darkwing Duck, we made the alien creatures hats, and it was just goofy. And the fact that they find Darkwing's hat and they go, "Ooh, it's just a husk," that's the kind of stuff I would love to see those guys return. We brought them back once, just to see different types of hats with different types of personalities and whatever. But so it would be fun to go through the villains and that old thing of, well, here's a character that looks kind of neat or has an interesting gimmick, but no one's ever really done anything with the Bug Master or something. To me, that's what the comics could easily take liberties with. But really, I'm sure from a business model, I would say I would love to see Dynamite grow from what they've got. And like I say, do little, limited series of each of the heroes totally different in tone. Like I think Stigma would be,
Oh yeah.
I don't know, like Baby Huey or something, or write him like Gladstone Gander, the luckiest duck. With Stigman, he's just blundering into things, and you know, he doesn't realize his tail is knocking these guys out who were trying to rob a bank or something. You know, I don't know where you'd go with that, but that would be a very broad one with certain sensibility, maybe with a lot of guest stars, where a Morgana one I think could stand on her own, and Gizmo Duck playing with both Superman conceits and Iron Man conceits. I mean, I know you can do there. Yeah, the time that Gizmo Duck disappeared into a bottle of gin, you know, certainly do that.
I do think Morgana like really does have legs, so to speak, for that. Like you can do a lot with her, and yeah, it's like it is. If I'm remembering right, you changed her personality pretty fast in the show because you clearly liked her, and then like she comes back and gets developed more and more every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a great
Dev Ross was the name of the writer who did the first script of Morgana, and she really embraced it. I mean, my feeling was think of Morticia Adams, and Vampirella, and you know all
Lily
that
Munster
types.
and whatever.
Yeah, and just again bring in that Catwoman kind of thing, and I, you know, again, those single episodes, she just had a tighter personality. Afterwards, she got a little too domesticated, and then especially in the comics, it's like, you know, in other runs, she just shows up as a you know, just as a girlfriend instead of really going into it. Where she comes, in fact, one of the Boom issues or runs, and this was well into it because the creative team had changed, as I recall, but they were pitching the idea that Morgana had to take a break because it was too dangerous. And to me, working in Darkwing's world was too dangerous. And to me, it was like, you realize she comes from a dimension or a world of monsters and creatures and, you know, all of that. This is not a woman who's going to be scared of things, you know. I'd go the other way. So, but at the time, nobody was asking me. So, but I just think, again, you have leeway in the comics to push things, and like a Bushroot, again, you know, based on a minor Human Torch villain called Plant Man, and then a little bit of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. It was like
the Floronic Man,
yeah, exactly, and get into, well, literally, it was just, I hadn't read that many issues, but I just knew that Swamp Thing, the idea that somewhere in there it was like his pollen could basically reproduce himself or something. And that's why one of the early episodes, we run over Bushroot with a lawnmower and just shred him. And then the last scene of the show is this little plant growing with a duck beak saying, hey, let's have some water over here or whatever. So he was this eternal character who I wrapped in plastic, you know, in between people. So again, there's all the new stuff. It's like, go ahead and flesh out these things. You know, if you have a character who's well, like Stigma being such an innocent, you could go through all sorts of comic tropes, and he's just going, "Wow, you're going to shrink me down? Look at that! That ant's bigger than me." Or, you know, just he could have the most fantastic adventures, but he's such an innocent that it doesn't melt his brain like it might somebody else. That I just love to see people explore that, and you know, a way to do that is to play with the characters, take liberties with the things, you know, and or if you suddenly get notes like, oh, Bugmaster wouldn't do that, it's like, do what Jeff did, and you know, okay, well, here's my villain, and you can, I'll tell you what it can do.
You can't be wrong. Yeah,
exactly. That happened to me on this is a Rescue Ranger story, but early on, my partner was Alan Zaslov, who used to be I think a coffee deliverer at Termite Terrace in the old days, and then was a director and animator at UA Studios in the early Gerald McBoing days and stuff. Anyway, he was brought to Disney to help out with DuckTales, as a seasoned veteran. And then I got teamed up with him on the 3rd season of Gummy Bears. And then we did several shows together. And the first one was Rescue Rangers. And a gag I was doing was Gadget, our inventor mouse, was walking across the ceiling in these kind of suction cup shoes and having a conversation with Chip and Dale below. And they get all excited about something and they run out. And she says, "Hey, wait for me." And she kind of undoes her shoes and, of course, falls to the floor. And there's a big crash, off screen. And Ellen came in and said, I don't think that's her personality. I said, "Alan, I'm making her personality. If we're write it that way, that's her personality." And he stopped. He went, because he was just thinking more traditional female roles, and I was going to be broader with her. And he went, "Oh, that's right." And then never heard that kind of comment from him again, And it's just like, yeah, you get to set your rules when you create a new character.
Yeah, well, that kind of touches on the way, Sue Storm was always kind of on the sideline at the beginning of Fantastic Four, even though potentially she's the most powerful character. And she's like, "Oh, the fans." They even did a thing where they actually berated the fans for writing in hate mail, like where Mr. Fantastic's reading it and like Sue's upset, and then for some reason Reed goes and points at a bust of Abraham Lincoln and starts lecturing, which has nothing to do with anything. I love that issue for that. And it's like, oh yeah, like, because when you go through the Fantastic Four, when you're a kid, you want to be the Thing. And then later you go, I don't want to be a bunch of orange rocks. I want to turn into fire or Stretch. And then ultimately, I think you finally always realize, no, I want a force field and I want to be invisible. That's the most mature choice of that whole thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, back in the early days when Jack just drew her with dotted lines, it was just invisibility was like, how valuable was it? And it wasn't until they figured out, oh, give her a force field, now she has more of a thing. And then later on, people said, well, what if you started a force field in somebody's brain and expanded it, or whatever? Whoops, maybe she was a little more powerful,
Yeah.
But you had to do it. I mean, it's odd when I started reading the Fantastic Four was around, I want to say 19 or something, or 18, something like that. And back then they were definitely a family, and Reed Richards was the kind of absent-minded father, and Sue Storm was mom, and the Thing and Human Torch were always, fighting with each other in playful ways. And it was so strange for me because I haven't been reading comics regularly, and it's like, gee, now Reed Richards is like one of the evil villains of the universe, or there is that side of him because of how much of a genius he is, and there's alternate realities and stuff like that. It's just weird how they all change. But you know what? Just saying something like that is, yes, use that in a Darkwing story. Somebody 6-parter do some guy who's good and then becomes super genius, and you get to see his arc, and then you got to defeat him at the end or whatever. But play with that kind of stuff to me is what's fun about the comics, that you can still do. You can still make these new episodes of the show, and you have a lot of creative liberty. We actually had back then more creativity or more leeway than I think anytime since, that there would be a lot of people looking at you while you're doing development to make sure you came up with a show they could sell and like. And then the boss would really look over those first 3 scripts. But then you had to worry about the other part of the division. So he kind of went away, and you had an executive who basically gave notes to keep you on track, supposedly. So between that time and the first footage coming back, when everybody says, okay, did you screw it up? We basically got to do anything I came up with, any rules. And the neat thing for us is our executive was Greg Wiseman, who was brand new to the department and had been an assistant editor at DC and had even written issues of Captain Marvel, I think. So he knew all our Silver Age references. He could suggest stuff. And the one thing that he said that I know the boss didn't know about, which I now say in every podcast interview, was that because he was really passionate when he gave a note. He said, "Look, this is your show. My job is to be objective and give you a note. You don't have to take it." And I know no Disney management person would ever allow someone to say, "You don't have to take my notes." But Greg was that way. On the other hand, he was so passionate about things, he would just wear you down. He always had a good point. It was just like, okay, can I give this up? Is this just a matter of taste or whatever? And we survived.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're getting close to our hour, and so as we kind of wrap up here, Jeff, why don't you give like a kind of pitch for the series you're writing, and where people can find anything else that you have coming out that you can talk about, and where people can find you out in the interwebs and social media.
Yeah, so far, my focus on Negaduck has been him trying to figure out, a big evil scheme worthy of him, and it kind of keeps eluding him, and then ultimately, this leads him to this new evil cabal, and you're going to find out that they have ulterior motives because they are evil villains. They, while they're enjoying their lair, there's a hidden reason they want Negaduck there. So, without spoiling that, I'll just give you that insight to that.
Where are you in the writing of it? Are you finished with your run, or is it
ongoing? I wrote it
ongoing?
all. It's
Okay, so it's
and so yeah, I've written through the second arc. I haven't heard anything about that. But I'll be ready to go in case anybody tells me, like we'd like some more. Yeah, it's a great world to play in, and I thank you for it. It's been a real hoot. And now this isn't what he was asking, but I've got to bug you because I've got you trapped here, Tad.
in this little box.
How did you start working at Disney Animation back in the day when you were working around the features?
Basically, I always loved animation, wanted to be in it. I thought Disney was the only place to be because they're the only ones doing full animation, which is what I was interested in. But when I was in high school, I said, they've got their guys, so what's the point? And I considered comic books and comic strips and whatever. It just so happened when I got to college, it turned out, I didn't know this, that Disney at that time was deciding we're going to keep animation going, and they started a training program with which one of the animation greats, Eric Larson, and you basically have 4 weeks to do a animated test, and if you survive that, you do the second one. If you survive that, you went in production as an in-betweener, and continue doing personal tests to get up there. But I didn't know any of that. The way I found out about the training program when I was a senior, trying to figure out, reality is right around the corner. What do I do? My girlfriend at the time, her suite mate was Tori Atencio, the daughter of Ex Atencio, who was a Disney layout artist, designer, and then at WED, which is now Imagineering, designing rides and stuff. So she knew that there was this training program under this executive whose name was Donald Duck Wall. So it was a name I couldn't forget. I could just ask for. So I called for information just to find out what was going on. Ended up being booked for well, come on in, bring your portfolio. And it's like, I hadn't been an art major since freshman year. So I had to, luckily I was a TA in ceramics, and my ceramics teacher, the head of the art department, had gone on sabbatical. So he was in charge of the whole program. He loved Disney. He could do the goofy, the yell, which he demonstrated. And so it got me to sit in on all these like drawing classes because I had to build up a portfolio super fast. So that got me in. I started at Disney 3 days after graduation, and the manager at the time said, you know, if you actually get in, meaning survive those 8 weeks, you won't get a vacation for another year. And I said, I wouldn't enjoy it anyway until I know I'm here or not. And I survived. And I came in like 5 months after Ron Clements, who I shared an office with, and went on to do direct and write little movies like Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Princess and the Frog, Moana,
I've heard of those.
Treasure Planet. Yeah. And then about 3 months before Glenn Keane, who's one of the top animators.
Sure.
So that was where I was. And eventually was doing personal tests and not showing them because I had a better idea. And that same manager came in and I said, hey, Ed, can you look at this? I was looking at something on Moviola. I'm thinking of going in and finishing this test to show the review board. And he said, oh, no, show it as is. That's great. And then, which was, okay, great. I can just show it as is. And then he says, yeah, we had kind of given up on you because I wasn't turning anything in. And I'm thinking like, maybe this could be part of a 6-month review where you might ask what I'm working on. Anyway, it was because, and that's about the time I realized I was made assistant animator. I had one little scene in Rescuers. And then I realized the reason why I wasn't turning in tests is I was thinking story the whole time. And I got to move into story on Fox and Hound, uncredited. And then I'm not sure they knew what to do with me as the directors on Fox and Hound changed. But anyway, that's ultimately, I went in and went over to design rides at Epcot after doing an emotional educational cartoon. Came back to TV, consulting on certain projects, and then helped out on some projects that led me to be on that first meeting about TV animation.
Okay.
And the real win of the story is that girlfriend who made the connection is now my wife. So
yay.
Win-win all around.
Story.
So, yeah.
So
yeah, it was actually in those early days of that training program. That was before, and they were kind of working on, hey, let's turn CalArts into more. They had an animation program, but it was very experimental. And they said, we're giving all this money to this university. It should have a character animation side. And they were basically designing that at the time. So that changed when those graduates started coming in.
Right.
But at the very beginning, it was like, it was funny when you ask each person, how did you find out about the training program? One guy was literally a projectionist in the theater and found this one article in a cinematographer magazine or something in the trash can and found out about it. And it turned out that article got several people in because like Ron Clements, he would call in, to see, is there any openings in animation? And the employment department, whatever, would say no, because they had always said no. They didn't know. They hadn't been told that there was any training program or anything like that. It was just like, no, we're not shopping for that. And so I forgot how he got around it. He actually worked for Hanna-Barbera for a time. In fact, there was a show called, I want to say, Speed Buggy or something, and an anthropomorphic car. And I guess there's and of course they reuse animation over and over. That's how they keep costs down. And he does this kind of ta-da pose, and Ron said he animated that. So
that's cool. Yeah, that was the era of Hanna-Barbera that everybody, no matter whether it made sense or not, had a dune buggy. Like they were very
exactly, yeah.
Like even the Funky Phantom, like who is a dead Revolutionary War era character, they still rode around New England in a dune buggy. It's just, it makes no sense, but just like you had to have a dune buggy and you had to have a dog.
There you go. Dogs were everything.
Yeah.
Scooby proved that.
Exactly.
So that's how I got in. You just have to have the right girlfriend.
Well, that's a great lesson.
So Ted, any final words about Darkwing Duck, or I mean, you said a lot, and I think you can.
People have asked me, well, do you want to work on the comics too? And I'm actually doing the covers of a run, which I don't know has officially been announced, but maybe I just
now
did.
It has.
Well, they offer, as part of the Kickstarter, they hit 150,000, and they actually say on the Kickstarter page, here's an ash can, a limited edition ash can, which is my cover, of an upcoming Darkwing series. So whether, I don't know how official that makes it, but it's on the Kickstarter page. But really, I would, I really don't need a lot of fans telling me I don't know how to write my duck. But the fun for me, just like it was, I mean, I loved, that's what I miss about animation, was working with creative teams. And if there was like a Marvel style yearly get together about the Darkwing issues and get the Darkwing team, even if it's a Zoom thing, I would love to be part of that. Just like when I talk, I got to read all my Sandman issues, and then I can harp on Amanda to say, this is what you should do. To try, if they do any of those projects, like a 6-issue set, I would love to be in the room, just to, especially in the initial part, to just say, hey, why don't we do this, or why don't you do that, and just get that brainstorming going, to realize you could really open up to do different types of things, because that's exciting for me. Love to be part of that. And you don't have to listen to me. I just want to say the stuff, and then everybody else does the work. So that would work for me.
and
are you kind of issues after that?
And are you kind of, surprised at how big, how Darkwing Duck has kind of lived on past the animated cartoon?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's surprised or just pleased with it. It's just, it comes down to this: if somebody makes good stories and entertaining stories and exciting artwork, it has the same chance as any other comic to succeed. And the better those things are, the more of a chance as it's going to have, no matter how the industry goes up and down. And I think Jeff is right about talking about, hey, there's a age range that you don't want to lose entirely, that can still be enjoyed by adults. I think these comics are perfect examples of that. Certainly the Justice Ducks one, that could be me as a kid reading them instead of Spooky and Casper, and yet they're funny. The number of jokes he has per page is astounding. So,
oh yeah, when you talk to Roger, somehow get him on the subject of Popeye. He's,
oh yeah, he did a Popeye run.
He did a Popeye book. He's clearly influenced by L.C. Segar, who, like, in my mind, is one of the top of cartooning, and like right at the beginning of the field, like, so I guess it's been all downhill ever since. But no, if you read those old Popeyes, they're amazing, and I know Roger's big into that. So there, if you need some time filler, do that.
Well, I know that I talked to him the other day, but we talked about coming back and doing some more once he has some other stuff that's coming up. So I'll have to remember to ask him that.
Just ask everybody about Popeye. That's what I want you to do. I'm not going to say in your show.
Yeah, I have one of the character designers I used on a ton of my shows is Greg Guler, and he loves Popeye and can do any era of Popeye.
Oh, nice.
Nailing it. So I'm glad to throw his name in the ring if Roger wants to return.
Yeah, good idea.
Well, I want to thank you, the two of you, and Amanda, for stopping by this evening and chatting. And I believe there's maybe a week left on the Kickstarter for the Dynamite Darkwing Duck.
I'd say less than that, I think. So
yeah,
do not delay. Jump right on it. Yeah. We're in the sunset years.
All right. Well, again, thank you guys, and thank everybody who watched. And we'd love to have both of you back to talk Darkwing Duck or comics at any time that you have something else that you'd like to kind of get out to readers. So
thanks, Chad.
Again, thank you very much. And
stay dangerous.
Yes. Jeff, are you doing any shows this year, or any appearances or anything like that?
I did some earlier in the year, and I need to figure out something for the fall because I would like to go somewhere, maybe the East Coast or something. But at the moment, I don't have anything planned. If anyone feels like bringing me out, it's my website's jeffparkerwrites.com. It's easy to find me.
Yeah. And think of me too. In fact, Jeff, I want you to put in a good word for me with Rose City and Emerald City.
Oh man,
I've never been to either of those. I would love to come up for those. Yeah.
Okay, I will tell the people I know and that you're into it. I'm pretty sure that'll be a big draw. That's good.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
Job is done.
Have a great evening, and we'll be in touch.
All right.